Well, Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has announced what he's calling a new form of military-industrial cooperation with Ukraine. Merz says Germany will help Kyiv develop its own long-range missile systems that would be free of any Western-imposed limitations or restrictions. The Chancellor made the statement during a visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to Berlin on Wednesday. I'd like to welcome Domitilla Sagramoso, an expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Germany now helping Ukraine make long-range weapons at home in Ukraine. How big of a shift is this? And do you see this as Europe taking a more muscular stance toward Russia?
I think it is very important, but this is not the first time that this is happening. It's just additional support that Germany is ready to provide to Ukraine for the production and to accelerate the production of many long-range drones, it seems. That's what we have learned in the last couple of hours, which are very relevant because they help Ukraine to hit very much behind enemy lines at targets which are essential to stop the Russian advances. For example, logistics around manufacturing of ammunition, equipment, potentially also airfields. So it is very important that Germany is providing this support, but it's not something new in that respect, but it is part of a big package. And I think that is what is really significant about this German agreement with Ukraine, is that it includes many other elements beyond the support of long-range weapons. There is also support for the production of long-range missiles inside Ukraine, and that is also very significant. There is also support for air defense systems, which are essential for Ukraine now, the famous IRIS air defense systems. Also support with satellite and communications, financing the Starlink. And so there's a variety of elements which are there. So I think that is what makes this package very, very important.
And why support Ukrainians making weapons at home? And why is Germany still holding back on sending the Taurus missiles that Ukraine has wanted for so long? We had Chancellor Merz, before he was Chancellor, saying that Taurus missiles should be sent to Ukraine. But now it appears there's no promises coming from Berlin.
Well, I think there is an advantage of helping production inside Ukraine because it accelerates, the supply chain. It's much closer to the battlefield. It also helps Ukraine develop its own arms industry and makes it easier in terms of then having to use these weapons and not having to engage in long negotiations with the original suppliers. So I think it is a very clever move, and I think there is a potential there for developing Ukraine's longer-range missile capability, which is developed, but it has some flaws. To a certain extent, the Neptune missile has a bit of vulnerabilities in terms of electronic warfare, and in that respect, the Taurus missile is particularly relevant because it is better at avoiding detection, and it is more like a sort of a stealth missile. It is also very powerful in terms of its weight and its range, which reaches around 500 kilometers. So there is hope potentially that Germany would sell or would help Ukraine by delivering these Taurus missiles. I think that what is happening at the moment is that Merz is not wanting very openly to discuss what he's delivering from Germany. To a certain extent, to keep the Russians guessing. I think he was very clear that he was not going to display openly any longer what Germany was directly delivering to Ukraine, and also to avoid an internal political discussion, which might make then the delivery a lot more sort of controversial. So I'm on the side that I think that there is a possibility that Germany starts delivering these missiles earlier on. What he also mentioned, Merz, is the need for training. It seems that Ukrainians might need a certain amount of training for the use of these missiles, but Ukrainians have shown great capabilities in terms of learning fast how to use many of the equipment that has been provided by Western nations.
Well, thank you so much for joining us with your insights today on DW. That is Domitilla Sagramoso at King's College London. And I'm joined here in the studio by Tyson Barker, a foreign policy analyst who most recently served in the Biden-Harris administration working on Ukraine, now at the Atlantic Council. Tyson, welcome.
Thank you.
So let's clear things up. First of all, why no invitation for Zelenskyy to this NATO summit yet?
Well, I think this clearly lies in Washington. President Zelenskyy was at the NATO summit last year in Washington that the Biden administration hosted. And it's clear that the other NATO allies would welcome or would be willing to have Zelenskyy present. But I think that the Trump administration continues to think it needs to preserve a kind of position, the space for negotiation, and that includes at least giving the impression of some kind of middle equidistance between Russia and Ukraine on specifically this kind of issue of high diplomacy.
That's really interesting. I want to ask you about Russia's intentions here. Do you think they're serious about finding a peace deal and having Trump be the one to negotiate that? Or what is their strategy toward the Trump administration?
I think their strategy is twofold. One is to continue to try to engage at the lowest level of intensity possible in kind of diplomatic overtures. They have just said that they want to provide a new term sheet for a potential peace next week in Istanbul. So they're trying to show a little leg in the Trump administration's attempt to broker a peace, but at the same time they're coupling that with more intense attacks. So it's low intensity diplomacy, high intensity offensive on the battlefield.
Yeah, let's talk about the German government and the recent shift in tone we've been hearing, especially from the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Things like lifting range limits on Western-supplied weapons to Ukraine. We also have this announcement of German funding for Ukraine to domestically produce its own weapons, right? What do you make of this more assertive German foreign policy?
I think we can't underestimate what a sea change this is. Germany is coming into the middle of where the European allies are with regard to Ukraine and providing these long-range capabilities. The United States, France, and the UK already do so. The idea of having them produced in Ukraine will be difficult short-term because it'll require time to build up production capacity, but long-term it will be more durable. And it's really important for Ukraine's future as kind of the tip of the spear for European security vis-a-vis Russia, because that's giving them the capability to produce these very sophisticated weapons in Ukraine for Ukrainians, protecting the rest of Europe.
So you think Kyiv will be satisfied with Zelensky's visit to Berlin and what he was able to get from there?
I think this was a good visit to Berlin.
Yeah. For the Ukrainians now, where would you say the biggest constraints are in their efforts on the battlefield?
On the battlefield, I think that they have two. One is always weapons. That's why Zelenskyy is engaged in the shuttle diplomacy. That's why he's going to partners saying, what else can you provide in munitions, in artillery, in air defense, etc. And the other is manpower. You know, they're already thinking about lowering the conscription age. They just don't have the population that obviously Russia has. So those are the two big constraints, weapons and troops.
And I'm curious, I know you worked in the Biden administration. If you were advising the Trump administration on its policy right now, you know, after the movement we've seen over the past few months, Trump famously hasn't ended the war in 24 hours, as he said. What would you tell them they should be doing? It's time
to call a spade, I think. Even though the Russians have been engaging in low intensity, it's not clear that they're engaging in good faith. And they're using this as an opportunity to prepare the ground for a summer offensive, to create a better battlefield position for whatever future negotiations come. The Trump administration needs to call them out on that by supplying more weapons, by thinking about sanctions, and by hopefully seizing these Russian sovereign assets and providing it to Ukraine.
And do you see that as a possible future timeline, that we would see a summer offensive and then perhaps some movement toward more serious negotiations?
I think that's what the Russians are hoping for. They want to... For everybody, it's a race against time. The Russians have an economy that is positioned as a war economy, but that's not durable long-term. It's durable probably until next year. So they really want to take advantage of this year where they do have essentially the upper hand. And part of that upper hand has been provided by the diplomatic, let's say, ambiguity or ambivalence of the Trump administration. So anything that the Trump administration can do to take that ambivalence away will be a net win for Ukraine.
When you say ambivalence, I have to think of strategic ambiguity,
right,
which seems to be the new strategy and policy of the new German government as well. Is this a valid strategy for Germany to be taking in the face of the attacks that Ukraine is facing from Russia?
Well, I think there are narrow definitions of strategic ambiguity with regard to the provision of tourists, for example, but there's no strategic ambiguity on whose side the German government supports. They're wholeheartedly with Ukraine. The United States continues to provide military and economic assistance to Ukraine, but it's clear that President Trump, after that Oval Office meeting in February, withdrawing intelligence support, some of the overlay that the Ukrainian government needs to defend itself, has shaken confidence in where the United States really stands on this. I think that is a much deeper ambiguity than what Germany has.
Well, Tyson, thank you so much for joining us in the studio to break all that down. We've been speaking with Tyson Barker at the Atlantic Council.
Thank you so much.